Dan, welcome to Nerd TV.
I'm glad to be here.
Gosh, you have been in the software business all your life? Since birth?
Since my teens, I guess.
Yeah.
I first got into the hardware business, sort of, and got interested in that, and in the photography business and whatever. And then my cousin brought home this book one day, which was teaching you to program. It was something about Fortran by Decima N. Anderson. And I was hooked. I had access to a time-sharing system back then. This was back in, must have been 66, something like that. And fall of 1966.
So how does a kid get access to a time-sharing system in 1966?
My cousin happened to go to one of the few schools in the city. There was these magnet schools that had access to this time-sharing system. There were, just a handful of them, and he was there. But it's a public school, so anybody has access to go there. So I go after school. I go over there. It was a tough school, and so it was very empty at night. And in fact, at one point, the key didn't work or something. We took the door off the hinges and brought the lock over locksmith to get another key or something like that. The people remind me of the story. But they had a QuickTran terminal, which was, I think, an IBM 7404. And then what I did is I called up people at the Bureau of Public Education and got to use their computers downtown. So they would run their payroll with 1401, and then they'd run my Fortran program, with the tapes driving and all that. But finally, I actually had access.
Why would they do that?
I don't know. I guess because I asked.
Okay.
And then for the next summer, there was a National Science Foundation course that I took at the Moore School of the University of Pennsylvania, right down the hall from where they did the ENIAC. And there I programmed in 1130, an IBM 1130, and some interpreted language they had on it. And that's where I really got into programming. And then I got a job at the University of Pennsylvania at the Wharton School in the computer services department and Wharton Computational Services. And I would help the MBA students. Little did I know I would eventually be the MBA student. With their Fortran was a language requirement. You could take it to fulfill your language requirement.
Oh.
So I'd help them. They would come in and they'd bring their deck of cards, and I'd say, "Oh, you forgot this card," and I'd rip off the printouts from the printers, and I did some programming there, and actually programmed the programs that marked tests for some of the kids. The entrance test when freshmen came in, my program ran it and did the statistics and did stuff like that.
Now,
that's how I made money in high school. It paid for my photography habit, because photography originally paid for my electronics habit by selling pictures, but then to really pay for my photography habit and electronics habit, I needed programming, which paid for that.
Okay. And how did you choose to learn Fortran to start? That's unusual.
That's the book. No, in those days, what would you learn back then?
Oh.
66. I mean, that was
66.
See, QuickTran what was available.
Yeah.
Was on timeshare.
I guess you're right.
Was Fortran or BASIC.
Yeah.
And
the BASIC was 64, 65.
So
it was still in Dartmouth.
Yeah. I mean, I got to use a GE time-sharing system. And I think it was the fall of 66 or 67, I don't remember. And it was the fall of 67. I used it for some homework things, like I'd have it test me on French, and I'd put in a list of words and would randomly ask in one language and I have to answer in the other language. And, on one of those big terminals that you would, there were really a teletype, in a box, and you put an acoustic coupler, and you dial into the service. I had access to that at Wharton, so it was kind of cool.
And all this still as a teenager?
As a teenager. In my high school, I went to a small Jewish day school outside of Philadelphia, and one of my schoolmates a year ahead of me was a guy by the name of Jonathan Lazarus, and he was the other computer person in the school. And one day he was doing some job with computers, and he brought in one of these big things, and we had an assembly. Everybody got in the foyer, which was a room a couple times size of this living room, which it was an old house that it was in. And we had it there dialed in, but I knew how to program, so I typed a little program in, and everyone, wow, we actually had a computer in the school in the late 60s. This must have been like 67, 68. And John went on to found PC Week, and then ended up working for Microsoft, where he sat next to Ballmer. So he went off and did all these great things. And then I went off and did my stuff. We've kept up a bit since, but it was kind of cool. Wow. So you never know. I mean, about the stuff. The people who were the hackers in the old days, all ended up doing interesting stuff.
They did. They did. And was this something that you wanted to do as a profession?
I don't know. I used it in high school. When I went to college, I applied assuming I'd use computers and something when I went to college. And I got into MIT and figured, well, how can I turn that down? So I went to MIT, and there I started as a math major, figuring I don't want to be a computer nerd or whatever. I mean, I want to do something more liberal artsy or something. But I was flunking out as a math major and top of the class in computers, so I saw the handwriting on the wall. Yeah. When I graduated, there were hundreds of us who graduated in computer science, so I couldn't really get into the good grad schools because I had been a math major for a while. I messed up my grade point. So I ended up working at Digital Equipment Corporation on computer typesetting and then word processing. And because my father was a printer, and I had been as a kid, I was into that type of stuff, and doing systems programming and language stuff while I was trained at that was not exactly what I wanted to end up doing. At MIT, I worked on the Multics project. Out of that came Unix and stuff like that. So, and I met all sorts of people there who went on to help create the internet and stuff like that. It was cool.
How did the Multics people feel about Unix?
Well, they're always, people always called it, look at the different spelling. It's one of what Multics was many of. Yeah. And it was Multics that was missing some features, important things. But it was the fact that the people who went off and did it were major people in the development of ideas in Multics. Whenever I would use Unix, I just remember how do we do it in Multics and try it, and sure enough, it often worked. It had types, and it had, LS was the way you get it. It had drivers and stuff, and I used a higher level language to program it. And so, nowadays, of course, we feel wonderful that, that was, the 386 architecture came out of the Multics architecture. So an awful lot of things.
I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Now, they decided to use it most people use it in the flat file, in the flat address space, not in the segmented address space format that Multics used. And we missed that, because in Multics, all you did is say, I want a file, open a file, and you've got an address pointer to it. And you can just do memory operations on it. And it made input-output really easy. And you could have any amount of memory because everything started at 0 because it was a new segment. But initially that was too expensive in the hardware, so a lot of people didn't do that, and they went with the flat memory system where they have to simulate as if they had segments. But the rings of protection and the whole idea of the kernel in the middle and that type of stuff, writing your operating system in a higher level language and all those things, using a shell to do stuff. A lot of them were pioneered in many ways through Multics. Security being extremely important. Multics was partially funded by NSA and others in the government. So we were very security conscious. And we were always told stories, about that would teach us why you needed to be more secure. They would tell us about what does it mean to be secure? Well, it's not just not telling, but not letting them know. So, for example, we were told that on the day of the Cuban Missile Crisis, so the story goes, the head of NSA was seen rushing from his car. That was considered a security breach. Okay. These are the war stories you're told.
I see. Spies have to saunter.
Yeah. Well, if they run, they have to always run.
Oh. Okay.
It's poker. Your poker face right there. Yeah. If you're always nervous, it's fine. But if only if you can distinguish. The same thing. There were people looked about. What type of attacks could you do to figure out what was going on? About trust. Bob Frankston, my partner doing VisiCalc, he did his master's thesis on how do you, in a computer marketplace like Multics was, or the internet, called the ARPANET or whatever it was becoming at the time, and you have all these parties that don't necessarily trust each other. How do you have micropayments? How do you have payments? And he came up with his thesis was how you need a third party that you can trust and how you can automatically do stuff. It was very interesting. This is back in the early 70s, I think, or in the 70s he did it. In the 70s he did that. So we were thinking about those type of things. And we had people whose job was to try to crack systems. The government was paying them to try to figure out how to crack Multics. And I heard a talk from one of them a year or two ago. It was fascinating about what they did and the exploits that they used, which of course all work today. But the Multics didn't worry about Stack Overflow because of its architecture. It could handle that a lot better. But and if stacks went down, stuff up, or whatever, so they were very security conscious. And even when they started doing the ARPANET, they wanted to do things encrypted, but they were told by the government that was a no, supposedly.
Really?
NSA was, you'll have to talk to some people about that.
Yeah, I will.
I can give you some names.
Okay.
So there, there were all sorts of, there were real war stories,
Yeah. Literal war stories.
So, but I went from there to working at newspapers, computerized typesetting newspapers, which was the real world.
Yeah.
And then after that, I went worked with microprocessors at a company that made electronic cash registers for fast food places, and word processing before that, and in between. So I got a range of regular people using my products, and what it's like. I mean, like they didn't have modems, didn't have extra telephone lines for the fast food, so you'd have to call up if you wanted to download what happened that day, you'd call up the store, which was the payphone, and they would throw a switch which would connect it to, so they could down to the modem, so they could download it. But sometimes the person said, I can't talk to you now, we're being robbed. It was interesting working for companies like that. But actually, that was a small company, a very small company, and I found out that it was able to do all the things big companies could do. It was wave soldering, made its equipment there, and it was using the latest chips and chipsets and doing all this neat development. And it was a little company, and we were decked as $1 billion company in those days, which was a lot of money in those days. Huge in those days. And here, I was there when it went through the billion, I think. And, and this little company could do all that same stuff. It was just up and inspired me to not mind becoming a little company person.
You realize the potential of a little company to be a big company, or to just be a successful little company?
The little companies aren't a bad thing to work for. They can do just as good work as the big. I mean, you don't have to be a big company to do interesting work.
That's right.
As a techie or as anybody. And since my grandfather was a small business person, this fit with me. But I did go off to Harvard Business School to learn what business is about, because I figured I didn't know much about business. And what better way to learn than to go to school? Yeah. And I treated myself to 2 years of school there. I've been making money and saving it as a programmer and all that, and to suddenly become a student again, it's sort of treating yourself, spending your money to be able to go back to school.
So, how did you fit in at Harvard Business School?
The first evening, we showed up at a reception, and spouses would come up to me and look at me with a beard and a ponytail down almost to my waist and say, "Oh, thank God you're here," because they'd say, "Oh, I was afraid, they'd turn into these, these capitalistic, automatons here, but with somebody like you." I had the third longest hair in my section of 90 people. There were 3 women. 3 of the women had longer hair. And I did cut it the summer between my 2 years when I was going cross-country, camping cross-country. I had seen Easy Rider and decided it. And I talked to people that actually had people with tire irons come after them. Decided I would go, if I'm ever going to cut my hair, I should cut it now. So I cut it then. But I fit in well. The professors were, they're not the big business whatever type. I mean, they're much more into ethics and stuff than a lot of the students necessarily were. And I took took some courses in entrepreneurship and stuff, and they brought in all these wonderful entrepreneurs of all different sorts. Sprague, who did Advent, came in, and the head of analog devices, and we met all these different people. For me, it was great because I got to see all sorts of business and how it was done, the case method, you learn about all sorts of things, and it helped inspire the spreadsheet. So, and I had one of my classmates who inspired me in certain ways was a real inventor. He had gone to RISD, Rhode Island School of Design, and he worked with this guy by the name of Ron. Ron has a company called Ronco.
Oh, sure.
And my friend is going on, he did the rotisserie. His name's on the package. Among other things, and spray on hair, he helped get that out the door, and whatever. So he had some very interesting, actually one of my classmates is governor of New Hampshire right now.
Ron Popeil.
Yeah, his partner or whatever, I mean Ron's the head, was one of our classmates in our section. We had 2 Olympic athletes. I mean, it's a really interesting, people from England, and one of my classmates was a member of OPEC. He was from Central American company that did oil, and he actually sat behind Sheikh Yamani, who was at OPEC, like big guy in OPEC, and he had been himself was kidnapped by Carlos. I mean, it was great, interesting learning about what the world is filled of.
I was there the day that happened.
Oh boy, but you weren't kidnapped.
No, I was sitting in OPEC headquarters in Vienna.
Yeah.
I was in the lobby when Carlos and the people came in.
Oh my God!
And they said, "This is I didn't know it was Carlos." Yeah. And there was this fat Viennese off-duty policeman who was the security guard.
Yeah.
And he said, "Who are you?" And Carlos said, "We're the Palestinian delegation." And he waved him through.
Oh my God! Oh God!
Yeah.
It was. You get interesting stories about all sorts of stuff, and you learn about all different ways, about different people. So it was a really great experience to go to school like that. And I graduated chairman of the board with no salary, but I had this product that I announced a few days before graduation, the NCC in New York, which is also when I first met Bill Gates at that, and Ben Rosen and a lot of people.
And that was the spreadsheet.
That was the spreadsheet. That's when and VisiCalc was, the idea for VisiCalc came to me sitting there in Harvard Business School, and taking my word processing background from digital, my interpreter and other background from the days in before MIT and at MIT and stuff, and putting it all together and coming up with the idea of word processing with numbers. The idea that it was a desktop publishing became, but those days was for newspapers, layout. You could put things anywhere you want because we used a paper as a 2-dimensional grid where you put things anywhere you felt like it. Not that it's columns and rows that are named and whatever, but that it's a general way you put things. And the original idea was supposed to be a head-up display because I'm daydreaming in class. There are 90 people in a class, when you're listening to professors. So I imagined my calculator had a mouse ball at the bottom. I had actually seen a mouse before or something. And you moved it and you had a head-up display so you could look at people and you could, add up numbers and stuff like that. And I came up with the whole idea you could put things wherever you want, just like a blackboard, because I was thinking blackboard and spreadsheet paper. I even found some of my notes about it were on the back of a publication called The Spreadsheet, that we had, which was the one of the rags we had at business school.
Sure.
So, decided to found a company to make this thing. It was published by another business school graduate that I met through the business school. I had professors advising me. I mean, one professor hooked me up with my publisher, with Dan Filestra and Peter Jennings and their company, and 2 MBAs, one from Harvard and one elsewhere. When we wanted advice on things, I went to Glauber at one point, who ended up as head of NASDAQ, the company that owned NASDAQ. I was Assistant Secretary of Treasury later on. Michael Porter of Competitive Analysis and all gave us advice. We went to him. I mean, this is really cool to have what's available from the business school. And then...
So had you gone to Cleveland State Business School, it wouldn't have been the same.
It would have been different. I may have ended up with the same product if I had the same background. The first professor who said it might be a good idea was a operations management and production management. But the first computer person that I told about it was my professor, Professor Cash, Jim Cash, who actually had a master's in computer science. And he told me user interface. I mean, he couldn't visualize what I was talking about because without actually seeing the product, it's hard to visualize it. But he said he's talking about the input-output, the user interface. That is the important thing, Dan. You should do this. And Jim went on to head the MBA program. He's now retired. He's a director of Microsoft and Migrator and General Electric and stuff like that. And he's, I think, head of the compliance committee of the Microsoft board. Jim's a really good guy.
There's a job.
There's a job. I feel really bad for Jim to have it, but if anybody's going to have it, he's a good guy to have it. Jim's he decided to go become a business school professor when he could have gone on to industry. Yeah. But he had the chance to be the first tenured black professor at Harvard Business School, and was. And that helped a lot of people of color get into business school. So that was good stuff. And he also was the one who helped spearhead getting email and a lot of those other things into the curriculum and stuff, and teaching managers who came in for the advanced programs to learn to use computers more and stuff. So I had professors like that, but he taught me cost accounting.
Yeah, exactly. Were you further ahead in the use of computers in business school than industry was on a comparable level?
Let's see. They used a time sharing, a deck time sharing system at the time, and they used it for simulation, and that was about it. We used our calculators. Some people, like my friend Alan, who went on to be with Ronco, Alan had a programmable calculator. He had more money than I did. He had one of the HP programmable, and he would always program the things in the calculator there, and I would run down and use the basic terminal, and he would always beat me, and I had bugs. And I learned that quick and dirty can win when we were study partners. So we didn't use computers that much at the time, though I did do some prototyping for VisiCalc on their machines. The actual time when I came up with that I'll use the ABC 1, 2, 3 type grid, and that you would see the results, and then you would have a little window where you would be able to see the formula and stuff. That idea came to me while prototyping it on one of the terminals in BASIC. But no, they weren't really into using it. It wasn't like you didn't do email, we didn't do any of that stuff. That Jim and the others started bringing it in, I think, first to when VisiCalc came in, remember, after me, and I did show, there were professors, I think Eric Rosenfeld, who was a professor there, who was one of the partners in Mitch Capel with Lotus, early Lotus, or pre-Lotus with VisiPlot, VisiTrend, and stuff like that. He bought an Apple and would bring it in and use it, and I think used it to help mark tests and stuff, and help, the professors actually started using it, and of course they noticed that certain students, and then of course they started, they brought in using a laptop. It was an IBM portable, I think, the first time, and they started adding it to it. But actually, in the development, while I was prototyping, I had the early versions of it. I brought professors in under non-disclosure to see it, and one of them was Barbara Jackson, who had been my professor where I had learned about financial forecasting systems at the school, and we actually got to play with some of those systems. And she was on the calculator committee. Because remember, they had gone from slide rules. They had to go. First, they had slide rules in the old days. Then they had to move to calculators and redo all the. They had to make calculations that were easy to do on slide rules, and then had to redo all the cases to be able to have numbers and stuff for calculators. And so she actually was very helpful. She explained to me, she had done a lot of work with computers with senior executives, and was telling me how my competition was not any of these other tools. It was the back of an envelope. It was paper, pencil, and calculator. That if it wasn't easy enough to do it the first time, they won't do it. And it has to be, she said, easier. She pushed me to that stuff. My classmate, I remember my classmate John Reese, the other MIT grad in my section, saying, well, Dan, you have it this way. Can't you remove that? Because it's obvious that 1 plus and then pushing an arrow is unambiguous, that you want to point, put the thing in, you don't have to put a key. I said, well, John, that's a great idea. We're going to take a reunion tonight, and he'll be there. I got to see him about that. So I got people who gave me ideas along those lines. But they started, and eventually they switched over, and then now they use the spreadsheet. It's just kind of cool to affect teaching at your old institution.
Oh, yeah.
And that was one of the big things.
It's an old institution. At every institution.
I know at every institution, but especially, how you like to have your parents be happy with what you do, and your family happy with what you do. Having your teachers who you look up to and who taught you things to say you did good stuff. It's a nice thing to have.
Oh yeah.
And to bring back something that helped you to add something to it. That's even better. Especially in my case, to make it easier for people who were going through what I went through to go through that stuff.
Now, how did Bob Frankston come into the picture?
I met Bob at MIT. After the first semester, I figured MIT is going to be so hard. I'm not going to do any computer stuff, because I'll flunk out if I do that. So my first semester, I took a computer course, which I did really well in. I was going into the final. I was number 1 in the class, I think. It was pass-fail, so it didn't matter. On computer systems.
First among equals.
What?
First among equals.
Yeah, I am among equals. No, well, not everybody was a freshman. Only freshmen were pass-fail.
Oh, okay.
And then, worse yet, the second half of the year was Kent State happened, and the student strike, and they made everybody pass-fail for the last semester. But it didn't help for us freshmen because we were pass-fail anyway to cut pressure down so we wouldn't have as many suicides. I decided to look for a job for a program. So I started walking around the labs, and I poked my head in different offices, and I poked my head in Professor Corbideau's office, who's the head of the Multics project. And he said, "Oh, do you want a job? I can, I'll give you, you can want to have a job on the Multics project. We usually do it for credit, but we'll pay you some money." And I joined that project in December, January of less than January 70. And my first thing to do was to take Bob Frankston's bachelor's thesis project, which was a limited service system to give access to computers in a controlled environment to students, and add some features to it in order to make it fit it into Multics better. So I met Bob through that. And those of us who worked in that lab together got to know each other really well. Bob had a car because he had been working as a programmer since sometime in the early 60s. And he worked for White Weld, which later became Interactive Data Corporation and stuff. And so he was paid really well. He didn't get into MIT his first try. Went to Stony Brook for a year and then applied again. So he had to live off campus. So he had a car, but he had a computer terminal in his room, because he was paid, and it was great. So he would take us out to dinner. Those of us who worked in Multics, or out to breakfast, because we'd work through the night. And so we had a real social thing going among all us computer nerds. And so Bob and I got close. We figured one of these days we'll make a business together. And both of us had parents who were small business people. His in electronics and mine in print. And we stayed friends since.
Bob was a great guy.
Yeah, he really is. He lives just a few blocks from here. So he's off at a conference or something right now.
Now,
I talked to him last night. Because I had to tell him that I got to get permission from him to use for my new product. So, I wanted to, figure before I do certain things, I want to make sure it's okay with him if it might mention, if it may.
Because of the name?
Well, because of the name. Before I would use the name VisiCalc, I decided I would at least ask Bob.
Yeah,
sure. I asked a couple others.
Yeah.
But Bob protected before I hit the buy button on the domain name, and sent the application in, and also just to tell him what I was doing.
Yeah.
Because if I'm going to do something like that, I know that he'll peripherally be mentioned periodically, so he should at least get it okay.
So
it's not his not interest. He's never been really interested in spreadsheets. He's interested in communications much more.
Really?
Oh yeah, ubiquitous communications is his life. He just did VisiCalc, final on the side.
Well, he probably made a couple bucks too.
Not as much as he did doing other things.
Yeah.
When he went to he went to Lotus after Software Arts and stayed there, and that did pretty well for him. Got them into some things which they should have followed up on, like Lotus Express, which was this email thing where they had a tax on every email sent over MCI mail. That was a product he got started, but Lotus didn't follow up on that email and that product. Gates just never asked me, why did they give up on that? It's like, don't they breathe? Don't they breathe air? They gave up. Microsoft doesn't give up. Lotus gave up, and then they had to buy CCmail later. So Bob then joined me at Slate to do at hand a spreadsheet for pen computing, and he did something that was akin to VBA. I think before VBA, a basic like language. Like when I first met him, he had written BASIC for Multics. He had a BASIC like language for a spreadsheet that had cells built into the BASIC language. After Slate, he went on and went to Microsoft at a very good 5 years, 4.5 years, whatever. And he commuted from here.
I remember.
Spent half the time. But when he was there, he got them into home networking. He said it really has to just work. That we should be able to just plug a computer in and, to a home network, and it should just work. DHCP or whatever and stuff like that. And you could use things like, the wired LANs that work through the phone wires. He was pushing on that. He was pushing them to the internet. I remember I remember him showing me, I have a video somewhere of him showing me Mosaic running the browser, running on hardware for Microsoft, through Microsoft in the connections to the internet, the month that Netscape was incorporated. I think he was at that meeting, where Microsoft decided to go into the internet. But basically, he views his main thing as he really pushed them for home networking. His home was the original model for doing that stuff, and the prototype. So he did his good for the world there, and he did well by it. So, but that's all about connectivity.
Yeah.
Now he's doing a whole lot of other things to do with connectivity, trying to push people to make freedom of speech on the web, and the freedom of speech being the programs can do what they want to communicate to other programs, and not to have people put trollways in the way and things like that.
Interesting.
That everything can connect to everything, so that there'd be ubiquitous connectivity of every light bulb. And he says, why should a light switch have anything to do with the light bulb other than to tell it to turn on and off? You should have a little thing that's sort of like, just like you just slap it on the wall anywhere you want. Why do you have to have the wires come through the light that goes to, it's that, and why does it even have to be in the same room? Or why can't I, if I want to, be able to check the status of the switch from elsewhere in the world?
Exactly.
Securely.
Yeah.
So he writes about a lot of that stuff on his website.
Well, we'll have to get to Bob.
You really should get to Bob.
I definitely will.
You can't today.
No, he's at a conference. So how did it come that Bob hired on for VisiCalc?
Over VisiCalc? I was in business school, and let's see. So I had sort of come up with what it should be. I had a prototype of it written in BASIC that ran on this computer I used over at Dan Filstra's house, which was the offices of Personal Software, one of the largest publishing software in those days. It was run out of almost a living room or something. And he needed a programmer to convert the bridge program from I think TRS-80 to the Apple. So I said, well, why not Bob? Bob's a consultant. He does computer programming. He knows 6502 and that stuff. So Bob went to do some work for him, and he went over there. He got a listing of the basic program. The way he did it was he brought an SX70 camera and took pictures of the screen as he went through it, because they didn't have a printer on that machine. It's very basic day. So when I came up with the idea and then made a deal with Personal Software to publish it, Bob said, well, why don't he'll program it. He had access to some tools on the Multics system that were 6502 assembler stuff. He had written 6502 stuff for a previous company that he was a consultant to, ECD Corporation, competitor to Apple. I had done a little bit of consulting for ECD too. So Bob said, it'll only take a few weeks to write. So why not he'll write? I said, sure, so you can write it. We'll be partners. We've always wanted to be a business together. We'll use this to fund, our computer business, whatever we do, our software business. So, so Bob ended up doing most of the programming. Mm-hmm. I did the user interface design, mainly in the basic prototype. I played with that. Yeah. Wrote the spec, an early manual, the reference card. And so we'd been trying to go into business, with thinking of different areas before and hadn't been able to come up with an idea that was worthwhile. So this was sort of a way to start a business. And he came up with the name Software Arts, which was a good name for the company. And he helped fund it because he had some more money than I did. I borrowed money from my family, and he borrowed some money from his family and money he had. We borrowed money from a bank and bought a computer from Prime, which was a follow-on to Multics, which was very much like it. And, he wrote tools, and I wrote an editor, and he wrote an assembler and a linker, and we did VisiCalc. It took about 6 months until it was basically in final beta. It took about 9 months, 6 to 9 months. It shipped to 10 months or so, 10.5 months.
And what was the early reaction?
Some people went gaga over it. Ben Rosen, wrote that famous the software tail that wags the personal computer hardware dog about it. Hewlett Packard, one of my classmates, Tycho Howe, worked in the personal computing division, the one that did the HP 75, I think it was. Mm-hmm. And they licensed it from us based on that. So there were people who were interested in it. Apple was not as interested. Well, maybe they thought they could do it themselves or something. Mm. I remember there's politics there, but I didn't get to see a lot of that. But among non-computer people, see, if you're not a programmer, if you're not the actual audience for a product, you don't understand it. Most people say, well, computers can do anything. What's special about a spreadsheet? Programmers look at it and say, well, you're a basic program, But only the people who really needed it looked at it, and only of those that understood the idea of a general purpose tool. The people who know what a general purpose tool can do, and they can visualize it. That's a very small segment of the population. Yeah. And they can say, I can use it to do this for my product, my area. Other people needed somebody else to have done a thing like what they do. And they look at, you can use it for that. That's exactly what I do. Like I showed a person, this guy Joel Skolnick, who was at the computer store. He was their financial person. And he started shaking. And he said, that's what I do all week, You can do it in 15 minutes. Well, I do, it takes, I take hours, days every week to do. And showed me all the spreadsheets he did by hand. Those people got real excited. But it only sold about 1,000 units a month for the first year. Then we came out with the Radio Shack version, the Atari version, the Commodore version 2. Radio Shack started advertising, HP started advertising their version, which was a recode into BASIC of the program, or something or other in their system. They took our source code and from it. And so, then it started taking off. Did more and more. I just sold more and more personal software, later VisiCorp. They told me their VP of marketing, Ed Esper at the time, told me that, they found out that the more they raised the price, the more they sold. Like this, no matter what they did, they would have more. They'd sold. That's what happened. So, that's... I'm
not sure that cause and effect was actually there.
There wasn't a cause and effect. It was just people, it didn't matter because they had to go out and buy a computer for it, and the computer, and then you have to buy a good daisy wheel printer for it. It's just like $5,000 anyway. It's replacing maybe time sharing or something that's $5,000 a month. So who cared, It was what I say is the 2 orders of magnitude improvement, 2 weeks payback. Like desktop publishing, a lot of things, it pays for itself in 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. So what the hell? It's heads I win, tails I don't lose much. Which is something, one of my classmates is a business school professor now who wrote in a book, he's at Columbia, and Amar Betty, and he wrote in a book about small business, about about small business, where he interviewed all these Inc. 100 companies. Yeah. And he said, the thing about a small business person isn't that they take risks others wouldn't take. Mm-hmm. They don't take dumb risks. They're willing to take risks, but only good risks. But they can't investigate to death things like big people do. Mm-hmm. So they'll say things like, heads I win, tails I don't lose much.
Yeah.
That's good enough.
Yeah, exactly. Now, so it became from 1,000 units a month. At some point, it exploded into this huge.
Yeah. Eventually sold a few 100,000, maybe 700,000 copies.
Wow.
By the time Lotus shut it down. So
wow.
It was, which in those days was a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, basically, we knew how many apples were sold every month because we tracked it pretty well. Yeah. And IBM came to us, and basically, when they shipped, the ads showed VisiCalc, well, showed what was supposed to be VisiCalc. It was a basic mock-up. They didn't trust us or whatever. We could tell there was a character missing. But we shipped within a week of when the IBM PC came out and sold an awful lot of copies on that. So that it did really well.
But things went sour. What happened?
Oh, we were in an author-publisher relationship. So in those days, that was the model that some of the businesses had. It was the model Dan Filestra at Personal Software came out of the publishing business. He was a co-founder or editor or something like that of Byte magazine. Carl Helmers of Byte was a good friend of his. And so that model of publishing and even the lawyers we used, I think, were involved in publishing, that he used. So they started with the publishing business, and it turned out that the software business has hits. And the hit business, like that with a structure, that's not a good model. And they also went for venture capital, and which needs different returns. And it just messed things up. And the relationship between them and a lot of the authors soured. But we were the biggest author. Kapor, who was one of their authors at the time, and also an employee, just left and they bought him out. He got, a couple $2 million out of that. We were selling 10 times as much, and we would have taken $10 million, but we couldn't come to an agreement with them. So things soured with that, and we ended up in a lawsuit with them. They sued us. It was bad stuff. It was really bad. We were about to sell our company. We were days from selling our company for cash, and we got sued. It was bad, and by them, and it was. They bet everything on Vision, which was something kind of like the Lisa and then the Macintosh.
Yeah.
Except it was character-based, but it was bitmapped. It had all the disadvantages of bitmap with all the disadvantages of character-based, sort of. I mean, it was an early, and it goaded Bill Gates into doing Windows. But Bill Gates had a real cash cow. And in our case, they sued their cash cow. So we had a real problem. And they had expected, I guess, to ship a lot and make money, but they didn't ship enough, and they went under. We sold out to Lotus. They kept us, saved us from going under. Mitch was a real hero there for us, and bought our assets. And
how was Mitch a hero?
For me,
yeah,
he kept my company from going bankrupt.
Okay.
And he paid me more than somebody else was about to pay me. So, and he did it real quick and easy, and gave me no handcuffs. He did. It was great. I mean, I ran into him one morning on the way to SoftCon, a software conference at the airport, and he asked me how things were going, and I said lousy, and he invited me up to sit next to him in the plane, first class. Mm-hmm. I'd been sitting next to another suitor who was trying to buy our company. I had been flying around. I went out to visit Esber over at Ashton Tate, and we were trying to, and Mitch said, "Oh, you have a engineering scientific product called TK Solver. We have an engineering scientific product division. Maybe we can do something." And that was Monday. Friday we had a check, and Friday night was the first Seder, Passover Seder, the liberation, of the slaves. And there we were. And that afternoon we signed the deal. It was so
the property of value was TK Solver.
That's the way they saw it. Of course, it turned out that the VisiCalc copyrights were more valuable to them in the long run with the look and feel cases that came in. But they didn't know that. And TK Solver, I believe they resold for what they paid. I don't know. It didn't make much difference. The PR value was good. They brought Bob in, which got them. They got Lotus Express out of it and Lotus Metro out of it. David Reed joined them, who had been with us, and he's one of the authors of the end-to-end argument paper the basis of the internet as we know it. David helped them, with led some of the projects for them, and all went off later to Interval and other places. And now professor, he's now working at the Media Lab. I think at Hewlett Packard. So they got a whole lot of other good people out of it. It was good for them, mm-hmm. and PR-wise, it was good. And it was the right thing to do.
Oh yeah.
And for me, it was good because I was part of the deal. What worked out is I had this product that I was working on, which was a demonstration program when I was at mm-hmm. Software Arts, and written in our internal language. And Mitch tried using it. We'd used it to prototype some of our stuff, and of course it had bugs and kept crashing. So I said, well, I want to write a real version of this in C as a program, and they said, fine, we'll make a deal. You can write the program, and to just give us a license, a company-wide license, and copy the source or something for our own use. And I said, sure. And Dan Bricklin's demo program came out of it, mm-hmm. and I made more money off the demo than I did off of VisiCalc.
Really?
So yeah, well, VisiCalc basically, I made my salary, which was a good salary.
Sure.
But I frequently took no salary. At the end, I got some from Lotus's money. I got a little bit of back salary. And we had a building that unfortunately we put effort into making a nice building. And when we sold the building, I made a little bit of money, paid for my house and stuff, for a small house. But demo paid for a bigger house. And I sold that off to Peter Norton for a little bit, and that was better than.
Now, Dan Bricklin's demo program was a way of making a demo version of your program before you would write the real version. It would look like
you could paint the screen to look the way you wanted, and then the next screen, and then the next screen. So you could make it look the way you wanted, and it would respond to keystrokes. You could program it, and it was such that a marketing person could use it. It was used for training. It was used for sales, for showing off things, and it was used for prototyping. So and in fact, an awful lot of the programs you see when you go to when you see a character-based program, there's a good chance the demo was used in the creation of the look with all the boxes around things for those programs. Thousands and thousands of copies were sold, $75 a piece list. It was used for head-up display design on fighter planes, I'm told. Cash registers, at Prodigy, they used it for designing screens. I think it was used by UPS. It was used, all sorts of people used it to demo. Lotus HAL was sold to Lotus by a demo that was done in demo, apparently.
Really?
Yeah, I think that's what Bill Gross had told me or something. It was used, all sorts of things were done in demo.
Wow.
I learned there about different licenses. The product had a free runtime, but it had a warning notice on it, and some people didn't like the warning notice. So you could get a runtime that didn't have the warning notice, but you had to indemnify me and pay me $1,000. And companies asked for it. IBM needed to do a demo, and they didn't want to have that on the demo they were showing off. I had to get a fax machine because this was always they needed immediately. And so I found out that with special licensing deals, you can make a lot more money. In fact, there's the difference between making, having a really good vacation and a lot of other things one year, and that was the difference. And because I had these dual licenses, that you could get by with that. It was kind of learned about that. The days learning about shareware and things like that. Learned about that because I was on the committee that decided who got the Andrew Flugelman Award
mm-hmm.
When it first came out, and we gave one of the first ones to it was this bulletin board system, and it was freeware. We gave it to, and we also gave it to. I gave another one, I think, to the development of freeware. Flugelman did the freeware, so to one of these bulletin boards for it. So I learned about that whole. Of course, I was using, freeware stuff or editors from that, the shareware type stuff.
Sure.
So I was learning about that type of world, which was and the legal world. I had between the lawsuits I was involved with and learning, and running a business and all the contracts involved and financing and all that, and the courses I took, I've gotten a whole education.
Yeah.
I could have gone to law school many times over with the money that was spent doing those things by somebody's money. but not, it's not really a law school education, it's still I'm a lawyer. But it's been helpful in understanding a lot of the other things, which is helping me in my understanding of open source.
And that's where you are now, right? You're in the open source world.
I'm in the open source, well, I'm in the business models world, among other things, of which open source is an important part of it. So, and, you know, when I was at Trellix, we were doing web authoring stuff, and we were doing hosting stuff. And I found that a lot of what we were building in-house was based on Linux, because it was cheaper and better for stuff, and Perl, and we used open source this and that, and we needed to have a certain type of product, and we were able to get an open source version of that product to build our thing on, but we had to separate it appropriately so that we could, because of the GPL, and I started learning about all these things. I knew Richard Stallman from folk dancing and stuff from years ago, and from, you know, MIT. They didn't know him well, but I knew who he was. To me, he was a really good folk dancer at the time. He could do the Balkan dances. I couldn't. You know, that whole, so I've been learning about that, and then when I decided to go off on my own and program, because I wanted to program again, I've been releasing my things under different type of open sourcey like and eventually GPL licenses. So I've been experimenting with business models, learning about it, and I do consulting. And companies want to know, what should you do? What should you open source? What shouldn't you open source? You know, what I'm on advisory board to the state here, which is now this whole thing about open document format and open source, open standards. What's the difference between the two, and what should we do? So I've sort of gotten thrust into all of that. And I released a product in open source last year, List Garden, and it did pretty well in its area. It's a very narrow area about RSS, hand RSS feeds, when you don't have a blogging tool creating it for you. And that did really well, and the dynamics of the open source part really made a difference. I mean, people treated it differently. The marketing costs are so much lower, like they're zero, basically. Yeah. People don't expect the same support, and they're willing to pay for it. People give you donations if you ask for it. And plus, people now think you're an expert. You know, I mean, there are all these things. And that was 1 month of programming. So, you know, so when I decided to do something follow-on and did VisiCalc, I decided to go the same way, because I see that the market likes a product that people seem to say, you know, and it's GPL or it's open source, it means to them something, it's kind of like, you know, it's organic. Or it's kosher. Some people think that being something kosher means it's better. Now, this means that it, you know, it follows certain laws, certain rules. But it turns out that because it's been carefully watched, and because it costs so much to do it anyway, a lot of things are of higher quality, and of course, Hebrew National tries to make it look that way. Yeah. So there's this image that because it's that, it must be better. Well, there's some image about open source products of certain ilk that is positive, and people are more likely to recommend it because it's that. They're not going to. They feel that they can't. I guess it's theirs. I don't know why. They'll you know, maybe it's because it's part of the culture. It's the right thing. So you get certain viral stuff that doesn't pass on of your product. People telling people about it that you wouldn't get otherwise. Mm-hmm. And that, to me, open source pays some of the business model is your costs go down.
Yeah.
But where's the revenue? Well, it depends on what you need as revenue. Well, where was the revenue of some of my other products where the company's lost money? I raised, you know, tens of millions of dollars of venture capital, and the company, you know, in the end, didn't turn a profit. So, you know, that doesn't here. What is my goal? My goal is to run a consulting business, or to establish a reputation in an area where I do have a product. It's a help. If I just want to do good for the world, and I need it myself, so you know, I'm going to spend the money anyway. Why not do the little extra to make it a product? I know with open source that if you have the volume, there's money. That's the way it is. If you keep your cost structure, you have to build your business differently. That's a real problem with venture capital, because venture capital is set up for big businesses. They have to be at least, you know, spending millions of dollars to fit their model. When you can start some businesses in the open source world you don't have to spend on the marketing and the salespeople the same way initially. You don't have to spend on some of the development. You don't have to spend on those things. So your costs are much lower, but they can't invest in those chunks. So you're in that netherworld where you either do it as a labor of love, or you have some money to spend of your own, or you're just a fast coder, or you do something simple enough, or whatever, or you luck out. And we see a variety of those, from things in a dorm room. We have our Facebook and things like that. The things that people are able to build businesses out of, open source and all, in today's world pretty cheaply. So I'm learning about that, and this is to be able to speak about it. Just like anything else, I like to actually have got my hands dirty in the area, and this is a way to get my hands dirty in the area, and hopefully people will like the product or what it becomes. I mean, it's only an alpha right now, but I assume more people will try it than try ListGarden. Instead of thousands, a few thousand users.
Broader appeal.
That's a broader appeal. I'm using it to create websites right now. I mean, it creates its own website about it. So you can use it to create wiki-like design. I mean, it can create blog-type looks, and with you don't have to know HTML just like you do with a wiki. It handles the multiple editing a little differently, where I can be on my PC and it sucks down the source, and then but leaves a little breadcrumb up there so somebody else knows not to suck down the source. It takes care of that automatically. And then when I post it, then it goes away so somebody else can. When I do the server version of it, which is the same code with a little different front end, it'll do similar type stuff, and you'll be able to, you won't need a client side. It's always through a browser. So it looks like it might bring in, that together with consulting.
What does the future hold?
For
you, us, technology, the world?
Well, we now accept technology as being part of the world. I mean, the fact that the cell phone is now the thing everybody has, and people don't even, carry it instead of their wallet. And the first new thing since, the watch and the wallet, whatever everybody carries with them. Technology, the iPod, success of the iPod, we're seeing that it's become part of culture. I do a lot of reading of stuff about sociology and stuff. Things, like the Death and Life of Great American Cities, that great book and stuff like that, about what real people do and how communities interact and how the web came about with that. And we're now seeing that technology is now so much more part of life. We have to develop things along those ways. That's why I wrote an essay called Software of the Last 200 Years. As I learned about, we're building, it's part of our infrastructure as society, and we can't keep redoing everything. We have to build things that sort of run to who knows when somebody's going to replace it. And things have to interact and be able to morph and move and be resilient and non-brittle. They have to be non-brittle when things happen. Society, I look at, terrorists, and other things. We have to be able to deal with accidents, and natural resource, natural situation, like Katrina and stuff. We look at what worked at Katrina, what worked at 9/11, what didn't. Well, the president on 9/11 ended up having to use a cell phone because the secure systems didn't all work. The vice president found out about it from his assistant, who said, "Come watch on CNN," and that's where they were finding out. The planes were gotten down by ad hoc people figuring out on their own. BlackBerries worked. Nextel worked with some of those things. The internet continued to work where other things bogged down. Point-to-point stuff was they weren't able to rewire New York that easily. But voice over IP, look what happened to Katrina. What did the only way you could get telephone calls to City Hall in Katrina was over Vonage, voice over IP, by somebody who, by hook or crook, was able to keep their ISP up, which we can listen to podcasts of today. And we were listening in almost real time how they were keeping that ISP up, little realizing that the telephone calls. So we're learning about this is now all part of it. We have to build things that are in a different way than we used to build them. Microsoft's change that they're going through, with Ray there, with Ray Ozzie there, it's going to be, who worked for me at one point, way back when. great guy, and it's going to be interesting. They're making some changes. I think they have to change more than they're saying about what the world is and what the world wants. But I think that it's this technology that I've always loved, and many of us geeky types, nerdy types from back then, people, didn't know what it was we were doing. They would laugh about computers. Have now become just part of the fabric of society. Mm-hmm. And we always knew it was there, and it's now happening. I remember for me, the big aha moment was I picked up the Wall Street Journal, I think, and it had an editorial that mentioned VisiCalc, as if you knew what it was.
Yeah.
And that just got it for me.
Yeah.
And comics, that you had to know what a spreadsheet was. And then when you look at kids' textbooks today, and they teach spreadsheet.
Mm-hmm.
People said, didn't they have spreadsheet when you were in school? And I said, no. Remember, oh yeah. So that's kind of cool. And all these people that I knew when I was younger have helped build a lot of this stuff. Yeah. They were all building, and now the youngsters today, the people who were the age that I was when I did VisiCalc, who are coming up with things that are changing the world today, is unbelievable. So, but we don't know where it's going to go. I mean, we had no idea what computing was going to be like back. I mean, we did it. I mean, Bob's doing in the 70s about micropayments on the ARPANET, okay, and about, and how to trust third party, and then next thing we know, we have a PayPal or something like that.
Yeah.
I mean,
next thing we know, 25 years
later. But, I remember first seeing the mouse so many years ago, and then, in '84, finally, many years later, it got, with advertisements about it on the Super Bowl, and then, maybe 10 years later, it was a normal thing, and people could laugh if somebody talked into a mouse in a movie. We're moving a little faster than that now, but 10 years, 20 years is not a long time in society, because some of those people, Andy Hertzfeld and stuff, who and all these people you have, Torvalds and Weiners, and all these people have invented the things that make our society, improving our lives, all of our lives, and our social lives even. Yeah. And we need to be able to continue doing that.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're running out of bandwidth here. The bandwidth will hopefully get cheap. I hope so.
Thank you, Dan.
You're welcome.